The courtroom was her final battlefield. Elena Petrov had already lost her husband, her home, and her millions. Now they were about to take her daughter. As her husband's mistress smirked from the witness stand, Elena's body gave out and she collapsed. The mistress smiled, thinking she had won. She didn't know the judge was looking at a file just handed to her. She didn't know the judge was about to look up and say 4 words that would change everything. "You're under arrest." This isn't just a story of divorce. It's a story of a lie so perfect it fooled everyone, except the one person who had nothing left to lose. The silence of courtroom 3B was a physical weight pressing down on Elena Petrov. It was a sterile, suffocating silence, smelling faintly of old paper floor wax and the metallic tang of human anxiety. For 6 months, this room had been her personal hell. Today was the end. Elena sat bolt upright at the defendant's table, though in this case it was the respondent's table. In a high-stakes divorce, she felt every bit the criminal she was being painted as. Her knuckles were white, gripping the polished oak edge. She hadn't eaten in 36 hours, subsisting on stale coffee, and a primal fear that had hollowed out her stomach. She was a ghost, haunting her own life. Her suit, a charcoal gray wool that once felt powerful, now hung loosely on her depleted frame. Her blonde hair, which Matthew used to say captured the light, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun that did nothing to hide the dark, bruised circles under her eyes. Across the aisle, they sat. Her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, Matthew Petrov, and his associate. Matthew was the picture of corporate success. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford dark navy, projecting stability and control. He stared straight ahead, his profile like a Roman coin, handsome and utterly cold. He hadn't made eye contact with Elena in 82 days, she had counted. Beside him, closer than his own lawyer, was Serafina Hayes. Serafina was everything Elena was not. She was vibrant, her dark hair a glossy curtain, her makeup impeccable. She wore a deep crimson dress that was just professional enough for court, but suggestive enough to stake her claim. She was the chief restructuring officer of Petrov Innovations, the company Elena and Matthew had built from their college dorm room. And she was, of course, the mistress. But Serafina was no mere homewrecker. She was the architect of this entire nightmare. Elena's lawyer, Dylan Finch, leaned in his voice a low, urgent whisper. He was young, hungry, and in way over his head, but he was the only lawyer who had believed her enough to take the case on contingency. "Elena Judge Warren is about to reconvene," he whispered. "Their lawyer Sullivan is going for the final motion. He's going to bring up the psych eval. Whatever happens, whatever he says, you cannot react. Do you understand me? Don't look at them. Look at me or look at the judge." Elena nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The psych eval. The weapon they had crafted to paint her as an unstable, paranoid, unfit mother. The key to taking her 8-year-old daughter, Laura. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, his voice booming in the cavernous room. Judge Amelia Warren entered, her black robes sweeping behind her. She was a woman in her late 60s, with a reputation for suffering no fools and possessing a mind like a steel trap. She settled into her high-backed chair, her eyes scanning the room over her reading glasses. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You may proceed with your closing motion." Richard "Rick" Sullivan. Matthew's lawyer stood up. He was a shark in a $5,000 suit, all teeth and polished confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor," he boomed. "We have endured 6 months of theatrics," from the respondent. We have heard wild accusations of financial misconduct, embezzlement, and conspiracy, all without a single shred of evidence. What we have seen, however, is a clear and tragic pattern of emotional instability from Ms. Petrov. He gestured to Elena. A woman who, consumed by jealousy, has attempted to burn down the very company that provided her with a life of luxury, a woman who, by her own admission, has been overwhelmed and unable to cope. Dylan Finch shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Sullivan is mischaracterizing my client's testimony. It's argument, Mr. Finch. He's allowed some latitude. Sit down. Judge Warren said, not unkindly but firmly. Sullivan smiled. The facts are simple. Mr. Petrov, with the help of the brilliant Ms. Hayes, saved Petrov Innovations from financial ruin caused by Ms. Petrov's reckless and emotional mismanagement. He paused, picking up a bound document from his table. But this is no longer just about money, Your Honor. This is about the welfare of a child. We submit this the psychological evaluation of Dr. Alistair Finch, no relation to counsel, he added with a smirk, which concludes that Elena Petrov is currently suffering from, and I quote, paranoid personality disorder and severe emotional lability posing a potential risk to the well-being of her minor child. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Liar. Liar. She could feel the blood drain from her face. Therefore, Sullivan concluded, his voice resonating with false sympathy, we move that the court grant Mr. Petrov's petition, award him full and sole custody of Laura Petrov, and terminate Ms. Petrov's parental rights for the safety of the child. A low gasp escaped Elena's lips. Terminate. They weren't just asking for custody. They were trying to erase her. She looked across the aisle. Matthew was still staring at the judge. But Serafina turned her head and looked directly at Elena. And she smiled. It was not a triumphant smirk. It was a smile of pity, of condescension. It was the smile of a victor so assured of her win that she could afford to feel sorry for the loser. It was the smile that said, "You are nothing. You are done." That smile broke something inside Elena. The floor seemed to drop away. The room tilted, the fluorescent lights blurring into bright, painful streaks. The judge's face swam. Elena, Dylan Finch's voice sounded very far away. That's... Elena tried to stand. That's a lie. But the air was too thick. Her lungs wouldn't inflate. A black, crushing static filled her ears. She saw Dylan's panicked face as she pitched forward, her hand sliding off the table. Then silence. And darkness. Elena Petrov had fainted in court. It hadn't always been this way. 10 years ago, Petrov Innovations was just Elena and Matthew in a cramped apartment coding until 3 a.m., fueled by cheap pizza and a shared dream. Elena was the architect. Matthew was the salesman. She designed the revolutionary logistics algorithm, the Vanguard system, that could predict supply chain disruptions with 98% accuracy. He was the charismatic visionary who sold it to the world. They were a perfect team. He was the thunder. She was the lightning. Their marriage was a partnership built on late-night brainstorming sessions and a deep, abiding trust. When Laura was born, it felt like the final perfect piece. Elena had stepped back from full-time coding to raise Laura, but she never stepped away from the company. She sat on the board. She was the chief strategist, the one Matthew came to at midnight, tie undone, whispering, "Okay, Lena, I have a crazy idea, Talk me through it." The gilded cage was built so slowly she didn't even notice the bars. It started about 18 months ago. Matthew had just secured a massive Series C funding round valuing the company at $2 billion. He was on magazine covers. He was the Oracle of Austin. "We need to professionalize Lena," he told her over dinner at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. "We're playing in the big leagues. I need a COO, a real heavy hitter to optimize operations." He hired Serafina Hayes. She came with a glowing resume from a top-tier consulting firm in New York. She was brilliant, ruthless, and spoke the language of optimization and synergy that had begun to replace the language of dreams in Matthew's vocabulary. At first, Elena was relieved. Serafina handled the logistics, freeing Elena to focus on Laura and new R&D. But Serafina's optimizations began to feel like isolations. First, Serafina migrated the company's financial servers to a new, more secure platform. Elena's board-level access credentials glitched. "Sorry, Elena," Serafina had said, her voice dripping with professional courtesy. "It's a new encryption. We'll get you a new login sorted out. The IT guys are just swamped." The new login never came. Then the board meetings were rescheduled. "A conflict with the new investors, Elena. Just a quick sync-up. We'll send you the minutes," Matthew would say, already halfway out the door. The minutes became vague, sanitized summaries. Elena, busy with Laura's school play and a new charity project, let it slide. She trusted her husband. The thought that he would intentionally lock her out of her own life was so monstrous her mind simply refused to entertain it. The betrayal, when it came, was not a quiet discovery. It was an explosion. Elena had been planning a surprise 40th birthday trip for Matthew to Tuscany. She used their household credit card, the one they'd had for 15 years, to book the villa. Declined. She frowned. She tried again. Declined. She called the bank. A polite, nervous young man put her on hold for 10 minutes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Petrov," he finally stammered. "This account was closed, 3 months ago. The primary account holder, Mr. Petrov, consolidated the funds." "Consolidated into what?" I can't disclose that, ma'am. You're no longer listed as an authorized user on any of Mr. Petrov's accounts." The cold dread started then. She drove to the office, a sleek glass tower in downtown Austin. Her keycard, which used to open the executive elevator, beeped red. Access denied. She had to go to the front desk like a visitor. Elena Petrov to see Matthew Petrov. The receptionist, a young woman who Elena herself had hired, looked up with deep-set pity. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Petrov. Mr. Petrov is in a meeting. Ms. Hayes is his new executive assistant and manages all his scheduling. Shall I see if she's free?" Serafina. Elena didn't wait. She pushed past the security turnstile, triggering an alarm, and stormed into the executive elevator, jamming her old code in. Miraculously, it worked. The doors opened onto the 40th floor. The plush gray carpet, the modern art she had picked out, it all seemed alien. Serafina's new corner office, which used to be the R&D lounge, was right next to Matthew's. And through the frosted glass wall of Matthew's office, she saw them. They weren't kissing. It was almost worse. Serafina was standing behind Matthew, who was seated at his desk. Her hands were on his shoulders, massaging them, as she leaned in her chin, hooked over his shoulder, her crimson-nailed finger pointing at something on his monitor. They were a unit. Intimate, connected, a closed circle. Elena stumbled back. The sound must have alerted them. The door opened. Matthew looked out, his face annoyed, not guilty. "Elena, What are you doing? You set off the alarm. My card didn't work. She whispered the words, sounding stupid. The bank. They said my accounts are closed. Matthew sighed, a put-upon sound she had come to dread. Elena, this isn't the time. We're in the middle of a major deal. Who is she? Elena asked, looking past him at Serafina, who was now standing arms crossed, the picture of calm authority. She's my COO, Elena, as you perfectly well know, Matthew said, stepping into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind him. And your... Elena couldn't say the word. Matthew's face hardened. The annoyed husband was gone, replaced by the CEO. Serafina has been instrumental in protecting this company from your emotional, impulsive decisions. The spending was out of control. Lena, the charity project, the Tuscany trip, we are trying to run a business. My spending. It's our money, Matthew. My algorithm. The algorithm, he said, and this was the killing blow, was a college project. The company is a multi-billion-dollar entity that I and now Serafina manage. You are a board member. You are not a manager. I am your wife. His eyes were flat. Dead. The lawyers will be in touch, Elena. They'll be serving you at the house. I think it's best if you stay at the Four Seasons for a few days. You're divorcing me. I'm protecting the assets, he said. And Laura, she choked out. Laura will stay with me. The house is a stable environment. You're clearly overwrought. He turned and went back into his office, the door clicking shut with terrifying finality. That was 6 months ago. Since then, it had been a systematic demolition. The house was a marital asset, but Matthew's lawyers argued it was also collateral for a business loan, and it was seized. Elena was forced into a small rental apartment. They produced evidence of her mismanagement, the charity donation which Matthew had co-signed, the cancelled Tuscany trip, her extravagant spending at the grocery store. It was all twisted, reframed. Simultaneously, Serafina published a glowing article in Forbes, How Petrov Innovations was saved by strategic restructuring, positioning herself as the company's savior and implicitly Elena as the liability. Elena was left with nothing but a young contingency fee lawyer and a deep, burning conviction that she was being robbed. But the worst was the psych eval. Matthew's team had motioned for it, citing her erratic behavior, storming the office, and delusions, claiming Serafina was stealing from her. The court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Alistair Finch, had a 20-minute session with her. His report was a work of fiction full of diagnostic buzzwords: paranoid, unstable, lability. Elena knew with a sickening certainty that he had been paid. But she couldn't prove it, and now lying on a cold tile floor in an anteroom off the court, with a paramedic shining a light in her eyes, Elena knew she had lost. The faint was the final nail in her coffin. It was the proof they needed. She was the unstable woman they claimed she was. She had lost. Serafina had won. To understand the victory, you had to understand Serafina's performance. It had happened 2 days before the feint, and it was the masterpiece that had sealed Elena's fate. Serafina Hayes took the witness stand like an actress taking the stage. She was sworn in her voice, clear and calm. She wore a modest, high-necked navy blouse. She was the image of professional competence. Richard Sullivan. Matthew's lawyer handled her direct examination with a gentle paternal tone. Ms. Hayes, could you please describe for the court the state of Petrov Innovations when you were brought on as COO? Serafina clasped her hands in her lap. It was chaotic, she said, her voice tinged with professional regret. Mr. Petrov is a creative genius, But the company's back end was a shambles. There was no accountability, no clear P&L tracking. Spending was emotional, not strategic. Emotional spending. Can you give us an example? Certainly. Ms. Petrov, in her capacity as a board member, initiated a $5 million donation to a new unvetted children's art charity. A wonderful gesture, of course. She smiled warmly. But it was unbudgeted and nearly triggered a default on one of our covenants with our investors. It was impulsive. Dylan Finch jumped up. Objection. My client has testified that Mr. Petrov co-signed that donation, and Ms. Hayes is testifying to the financial context, Judge Warren countered. Continue, Ms. Hayes. Thank you, Your Honor. Serafina turned to the judge, a picture of earnest honesty. My job was to stop the bleeding. I had to make hard decisions. This unfortunately created friction with Ms. Petrov, who was used to, well, operating without oversight. Sullivan paced. Ms. Hayes, you've heard the allegations Ms. Petrov has made, that you sidelined her, that you locked her out of the company financials. How do you respond to that? Serafina looked genuinely hurt. It breaks my heart, truly, she said, her voice dropping. I deeply admire Elena. She's the mother of Matthew's child. But she was struggling. When we migrated to the new secure server, a non-negotiable requirement from our new investors, she seemed to view it as a personal attack. She refused to complete the security protocols. She would forget her passwords, then accuse the IT department of gaslighting her. Elena, sitting at her table, felt a hot rush of rage. Lies. You never sent the protocols. And what about your personal relationship with Mr. Petrov? Sullivan asked, his tone shifting to one of a concerned friend. Serafina blushed, just slightly. It was a perfect performance. Mr. Petrov and I developed a deep respect for one another. We were in the trenches together trying to save this company. He was in a very difficult position. His marriage was, well, he felt very unsupported. He felt emotionally abandoned. And your relationship became romantic. Yes, she said, her voice small. After he had formally separated from Ms. Petrov and moved out of the marital home. Not before. Another lie. A clean, simple, devastating lie. We fell in love, Serafina said, daring to look at Matthew with a soft, supportive gaze. I love him, and I love Laura like my own. All I have ever wanted is to protect them both. First the company, and now the family. She had done it. In 20 minutes, she had recast the entire narrative. She wasn't a mistress. She was a savior. She wasn't a thief. She was a financial steward. Elena wasn't a victim. She was a bitter, unstable ex-wife. It was Dylan Finch's turn for cross-examination. He was good, but he was outgunned. He was trying to fight a tank with a slingshot. Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that within 6 weeks of your hiring you had drafted documents to create 3 new offshore shell corporations in the Cayman Islands? Dylan asked, his voice sharp. Yes, that's correct, Serafina answered smoothly. For tax optimization and to hold international intellectual property rights. It's standard Finance 101 for a multinational corporation. And isn't it true that you are the sole signatory on those accounts? As the Chief Restructuring Officer, yes, that's my fiduciary duty. All accounts are of course fully audited and transparent to Mr. Petrov and our board. But not transparent to Ms. Petrov, another board member. As I testified, Serafina said, her tone patient, as if speaking to a child, Ms. Petrov had unfortunately not completed the security protocols to access the new portal. It's a tragedy of timing. Dylan paced, frustrated. He knew she was lying. He just couldn't prove it. Ms. Hayes, he said, shifting tactics. What exactly is your background? Your resume states you were at HS Capital in New York from 2015 to 2020. We can find no record of this firm. Sullivan was on his feet. Objection. Badgering counsel is on a fishing expedition. I'll allow it, Judge Warren said, leaning forward slightly. Answer the question, Ms. Hayes. Serafina didn't blink. HS Capital was a private family fund, Your Honor. It was not publicly registered. We managed the assets of the Van Kriegen estate. After Mr. Van Kriegen passed, the fund was dissolved. It's all perfectly standard. She had an answer for everything. Every door Dylan tried to open, Serafina had already locked and barricaded. He pressed on for another hour, trying to poke holes in her story about the server migration, about the wire transfers she'd authorized, about the timeline of her affair with Matthew. But she was flawless. She was a fortress of polished, reasonable corporate-speak lies. When she finally stepped down, Elena felt the case collapse. Serafina had inoculated herself. She had presented a narrative so compelling and so tight that Elena's own story now seemed, even to Elena herself, like the ravings of a paranoid woman. That night, Elena's visitation with Laura was supervised. A grim-faced social worker sat in her tiny rental apartment, taking notes as Elena read Goodnight Moon. When Laura cried, "I want to go home, Mommy," Elena had to fight back her own sobs. "We will, baby," she had promised, her voice breaking. "We will." But as she sat in court 2 days later, listening to Sullivan read the unfit mother evaluation, she knew that promise was a lie. She knew Serafina's performance had cost her everything. When Elena came to the first thing she felt was the cold floor. The second was a profound, crushing shame. "She's conscious," a gruff voice said. A paramedic was kneeling over her. "Elena, can you hear me?" It was Dylan Finch. His face was pale, his tie undone. "You fainted. We're in the anteroom." Elena tried to sit up, but the paramedic gently pushed her back down. "Just stay down for a moment, ma'am. Your blood pressure is all over the place." "What happened?" Elena whispered, the shame burning hot in her throat. "What did the judge say? She called a 30-minute recess?" Dylan said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't place. "Elena, just breathe. The bailiff and I carried you out." She smiled. Elena whispered, tears welling. "Dylan." She smiled as I fell. She won. She saw me faint, and she knew she'd won. "Elena, I need you to listen to me," Dylan said, grabbing her hand. He was vibrating with a new, frantic energy. "I need you to sit up. The paramedic is going to give you some water and a glucose tablet. I need you to get the color back in your face. I need you to walk back into that courtroom." "Why?" Elena sobbed. "So they can terminate my rights. I can't, Dylan. I can't go back in there. I've lost. She's too good." "No," Dylan said, his eyes boring into hers. "She's not good. She's sloppy. And she's arrogant." "What are you talking about? She's flawless." Dylan shook his head, a wild, almost terrifying grin spreading across his face. "She was, until this morning. While Sullivan was doing his victory lap, I got a text. My PI finally cracked it." Elena stared at him, confused. "PI Dylan, you can't afford a PI." "I can't," he agreed. "But my old college roommate Jackson Pierce is one of the best forensic accountants in the state. He owed me. Big time. He's been working this pro bono for 2 weeks ever since Serafina's testimony about HS Capital and the Van Kriegen estate." And, Dylan said, pulling out his phone, "there is no Van Kriegen estate. There never was. He ran a deep-level search on her. Serafina Hayes is an identity that's only existed for 5 years. He turned the phone screen to Elena. On it was a grainy 5-year-old mugshot from Delaware. The woman had mousy brown hair and a different nose, But the eyes were the same. "Meet Sarah Jenkins," Dillon said. "Wanted in Delaware for defrauding a tech CEO. Wanted in Colorado for a similar scam. She doesn't just have affairs, Elena. She's a professional. She targets self-made tech founders, insinuates herself as a financial expert, creates offshore shell companies, and then over a period of 12-18 months, she bleeds them dry. She was never helping Matthew hide the money from you. She was stealing it from both of you." Elena's mind, sluggish from the faint, struggled to catch up. Stealing? From Matthew, too? Yes, he was just the mark. You were just the obstacle. Jackson got a trace on those standard tax haven Cayman accounts. They aren't just holding Petrov Innovations' IP. For the last 6 months, Serafina, or Sarah, has been siphoning millions. Small transfers at first disguised as consulting fees, server maintenance, investment services. But in the last 48 hours after her testimony, she started liquidating. She's been transferring everything. She was planning to flee the country tonight. "My God," Elena whispered. "Jackson found the flight," Dillon said, his voice rising. "A one-way ticket to Zurich booked under the name Sarah Jenkins. He got the flight manifest. He got the bank transfers. He got the whole damn thing." But Matthew authorized her," Elena said. "He gave her signatory power. He gave Serafina Hayes signatory power on the business accounts," Dillon explained, talking faster now. "He thought she was just moving money around to shield it from you in the divorce. He had no idea she was moving it from those accounts into new accounts under her real name. He was her cover. He was so blinded by his own greed and his affair that he made his mistress the sole executor of his own financial ruin." The paramedic finished checking her vitals, looked at Dillon. "Sir, she needs to rest. I should probably take her to the hospital for observation." "No," Elena said, her voice hoarse, but with a new steel in it. She swung her legs over the side of the bench and sat up. The room spun for a second, then settled. The shame was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, righteous fury. She had built that company. That money was her daughter's future. And this parasite, was trying to steal it. "Dillon," Elena said, taking the water bottle from him and draining half of it. "Did Jackson send this to the police?" "He sent it to me to the DA's office and to the U.S. Marshals," Dillon said. "The DA has been trying to get an emergency warrant for her arrest, but it's been tied up with a magistrate. They were worried she'd bolt if we made a move." "She's in the courtroom," Elena said, standing up, her legs wobbly, but holding. "She thinks she's won. She's not going anywhere until the judge gives her my daughter." Dillon looked at his watch. "The recess is over in 5 minutes." "Good," Elena said. She splashed cold water on her face from the sink in the corner. She pulled the elastic from her hair, letting it fall to her shoulders. She looked at her reflection. The bruised eyes were still there, but the fear was gone. "What's the plan, Dillon? The DA's investigator is outside. He just arrived. He's going to pass the file to me as we walk in. I'm going to submit it as new evidence. Evidence of criminal fraud and perjury that directly impacts the disposition of the marital assets and the welfare of the child. Will Judge Warren allow it?" "She's a stickler for the truth," Dillon said. "She's not going to let a witness commit perjury in her court and then hand that same witness a child. She won't." Elena took a deep breath. "Okay, let's go." As she pushed the door open to walk back into the courtroom, she felt a strange, cold calm. It wasn't over. She had fainted, and the mistress had smiled. But the third act was just beginning. The walk back into courtroom 3B was the longest of Elena's life. The whispers stopped as she entered. She saw Serafina and Matthew at their table. Serafina leaned over to Sullivan, whispering something, and they both shared a small, smug chuckle. Matthew just looked annoyed, as if Elena's medical emergency was a personal inconvenience, a delay in his day. Elena and Dylan took their seats. Elena placed her hands on the table, forcing them to be still. She met no one's gaze. She just stared at the wooden seal of the state of Texas on the wall behind the judge's bench. "All rise." Judge Warren swept back in. She looked tired, and her gaze on Elena was sharp. "Ms. Petrov, are you medically fit to continue?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elena said. Her voice was clear. It didn't tremble. Across the aisle, Serafina's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She had expected tears, hysterics. She had not expected this cold, quiet composure. "Very well," the judge said. "Mr. Sullivan, you had concluded your motion. Mr. Finch, do you have a response before I rule?" "I do, Your Honor," Dylan said, standing. He held a thin manila folder. It had been passed to him by a man in a rumpled suit who had been waiting outside the door. "Your Honor," Dylan said, "in the last 30 minutes we have received new material evidence. Evidence that this entire proceeding is predicated on a campaign of pathological fraud and perjury." Sullivan was on his feet instantly. "Objection, grandstanding. This is a desperate last-ditch stunt. Whatever evidence he has is inadmissible. The discovery period is closed." "Ordinarily, I would agree, Mr. Sullivan," Judge Warren said, her eyes narrowing. "But pathological fraud is a very strong allegation, Mr. Finch. This had better not be a waste of the court's time." "It is not, Your Honor," Dylan said. He placed the folder on the bailiff's desk. "This evidence proves that the witness, Ms. Serafina Hayes, has perjured herself multiple times. It proves she is currently at this moment in the process of liquidating 100% of Petrov Innovations' assets into foreign accounts under a stolen identity. It proves she is, in fact, a fugitive from justice named Sarah Jenkins." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Elena watched them. Matthew went rigid, his head snapping to look at Dylan. He looked confused, not angry. "Serafina." She went perfectly, terrifyingly still. Her smile was gone, frozen in place. She looked like a marble statue. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have a response to that?" Sullivan scoffed, but his bravado was faltering. "Your Honor, it's absurd, Sarah Jenkins. Stolen identity. This is the very paranoia Dr. Finch's evaluation warned about. Mr. Finch is maligning a respected financial professional." Serafina leaned forward and whispered furiously in Sullivan's ear. He nodded, his confidence returning. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Hayes, informs me this is a ridiculous slander. She is who she says she is. She has never heard of a Sarah Jenkins. This is a pathetic, desperate attempt to smear her reputation." "Then she will have no objection," Dylan countered smoothly to the judge examining the evidence, while Judge Warren held out her hand. "Bailiff, give me the file." She opened it. The courtroom watched as the judge, a woman famous for her impartiality, read. They couldn't see the documents, but they could see her face. Her eyebrows climbed her forehead. She put on her reading glasses, leaning closer. Her lips pressed into a thin white line. She read for 3 full minutes. When she was done, she carefully squared the papers and placed them on her desk. She did not look at Dylan. She did not look at Elena. She looked directly at Serafina Hayes. "Ms. Hayes," the judge said, her voice like cracking ice. "A moment ago, you informed your counsel that you have never heard the name Sarah Jenkins. Is that correct?" Serafina stood up. Her voice was tight, but she was still playing the part. "Yes, Your Honor. I have no idea who that is. This is insane." "Then can you explain this?" The judge held up a piece of paper. It was the flight manifest. "This is a one-way ticket for Swiss Air Flight 88, Departing Austin Bergstrom tonight at 9:15 p.m., destination Zurich. It was booked 3 days ago. The name on the ticket is Sarah Jenkins. The credit card used to book it, however, is an American Express issued to Serafina Hayes. The blood drained from Serafina's face. She was no longer a statue. She was a cornered animal. I don't know, she stammered. That's not possible. My card must have been stolen. Stolen, the judge repeated. Then perhaps you can explain these. She held up another sheaf of papers. These are wire transfer authorizations from the Petrov Innovations Cayman Holding account. Over the last 48 hours, they document the movement of, let's see, $94 million. $94 million transferred to a numbered Swiss account, an account that, according to the U.S. Marshals who are also investigating you, Ms. Hayes, is controlled by one Sarah Jenkins. Matthew Petrov made a sound, a choked-off gasp. 94. He grabbed his own lawyer's arm. Rick, what is she talking about? The Cayman account was just for the IP. It only had 10 million. You told me it was just tax optimization, Sullivan sputtered, looking at Serafina, the blood draining from his own face as he realized his client had lied to him, had made him an unwitting accomplice to the fraud. Silence, Judge Warren barked. Her gavel slammed down the sound, echoing like a gunshot. Ms. Hayes, the judge continued, her voice lethal. These wire transfers required a two-step authentication, a password and a digital signature key. According to Mr. Petrov's reaction, he clearly didn't authorize them. But you did, as sole signatory. You used your digital key, which I am willing to bet is currently on your laptop, in that designer bag right next to you. Serafina's eyes darted to her bag. It was a fatal, telling glance. I was protecting the assets. Serafina tried, her voice rising to a shrill panic. From Elena. She was trying to seize them. I was moving them for safekeeping. Matthew knew. He knew. Did you, Mr. Petrov, the judge asked, her gaze slicing into him. Did you know that your associate was transferring $94 million of your company's money into a Swiss bank account under a false name? Matthew Petrov looked like he had been struck by lightning. He looked from the judge to Serafina, his mind finally putting the pieces together. The love, the support, the us against the world narrative, it was all a lie. He wasn't her partner. He was her mark. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, she said, Serafina, you told me it was just... You told me. You idiot! Serafina shrieked, her mask of cool sophistication completely gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of a common thief. You deserved it, both of you. You with your ego and her, she spat, pointing at Elena, with her nothingness. I built that, I saved it. It was my money. That, Judge Warren said, is a confession, and it is perjury. She looked to the bailiff, then to the two plainclothes officers who had silently entered the back of the courtroom. Elena watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was barely breathing. Serafina saw the officers. Her panic turned to animal terror. She grabbed her laptop bag and made a break for the side door. Bailiff, stop her, the judge commanded. The bailiff, a large, heavy-set man, moved with surprising speed, blocking her path. She tried to double back, but the two officers were already there. One of them, a woman, took Serafina's arm in a firm, no-nonsense grip. Let go of me, Serafina screamed. You can't do this. I have rights. Judge Warren stood up, her full height, radiating an authority that dwarfed everyone in the room. The courtroom was dead silent. Elena looked at Serafina, who was now pinned, her crimson dress twisted, her perfect hair a mess. Then the judge spoke the words. Serafina Hayes, also known as Sarah Jenkins. Judge Warren declared, her voice ringing with the cold, clear finality of absolute justice. You are under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud, identity theft, and multiple counts of perjury in my courtroom. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound Elena had ever heard. Serafina didn't just get arrested. She imploded. The moment the cold steel touched her wrist, the fight drained out of her, replaced by a torrent of vitriolic rage. You'll regret this, she screamed, her head twisting, her eyes finding Matthew. You weak, pathetic fool, I did everything I made you, and you… Her gaze shifted to Elena. You think you've won. He'll never love you. He's empty. You've won an empty, broken man. Ms. Hayes, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it, the arresting officer said, pulling her firmly toward the exit. He'll be bankrupt by morning, she shrieked, a last parting shot. I already liquidated everything. You're both broke. I still win. I win. And then she was gone, dragged out the side door, her screams echoing down the marble hallway until they were finally cut off by a heavy door closing. The courtroom was left in a state of stunned, reverberating shock. Richard Sullivan, Matthew's lawyer, had collapsed into his chair. His face was ashen. His career, built on representing the rich and powerful, was now linked to a high-profile, catastrophic fraud. He was looking at his client, Matthew, with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Matthew Petrov was completely broken. He was staring at the door where Serafina had disappeared. He wasn't just a man who had been conned. He was a man who had just watched his entire self-image shatter. He had sacrificed his wife, his family, and his integrity for a woman who had been robbing him blind. He had been the Oracle of Austin, the visionary, the genius, and he had been played for a fool by a common con artist. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking in silent, racking sobs. Finally, Judge Warren sat down. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, letting the silence stretch. Elena and Dylan just sat waiting. After a long minute, Judge Warren put her glasses back on. Her gaze was soft now, and it rested on Elena. Ms. Petrov, she said, her voice gentle. You have been through an ordeal that this court, that I deeply regret. It seems you were the only person in this entire equation telling the truth. The system failed to see it. Elena just nodded, tears welling in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of a vast, aching relief. Mr. Petrov, the judge said, her voice hardening again. Matthew looked up, his face puffy and red. He looked 10 years older. Sir, the judge said, you are in all likelihood the victim of a massive criminal fraud. But you are also the author of your own misfortune. Your breathtaking arrogance and greed led you to attempt to defraud your wife, your partner of 15 years, and the mother of your child. You conspired to strip her of her assets, her reputation, and her daughter. In doing so, you handed the keys to your entire kingdom to a predator. You are, in short, a fool, and a negligent one at that. Matthew flinched at every word. The district attorney's office, the judge continued, will be working with federal authorities to try and claw back the assets Ms. Hayes or Jenkins has stolen. Given that they are in a numbered Swiss account, I would not be optimistic. Petrov Innovations, as you know it, is likely insolvent. So, Matthew whispered. I have nothing. You have less than nothing, Mr. Petrov, Judge Warren said. You have your name, which is now toxic, and you have the consequences of your actions. She looked down at the file. Given this revelation, all previous motions and testimony are rendered moot. The psychological evaluation of Dr. Alistair Finch, she said, picking up the document with her fingertips as if it were contaminated, will be forwarded to the State Medical Board for immediate review. I suspect his license will be revoked by the end of the month. She looked at Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, your conduct in this case has been at best willfully ignorant. You'd be wise to retain your own counsel. Finally, she looked back to Elena and Dylan. Mr. Finch, you have done exemplary work. You are a credit to your profession. Dylan, stunned, just said, "Thank you, Your Honor." "Now," the judge said, "we are still in a divorce proceeding, and there is the matter of a child. All assets of the Petrov marriage are hereby frozen pending the outcome of the federal fraud investigation. Whatever is recovered, if anything, will be placed in a trust, and Ms. Petrov will be the sole administrator." She took a breath. "As to the custody of Laura Petrov, Mr. Petrov, you have demonstrated a catastrophic lack of judgment. You have willingly and knowingly engaged in an extramarital affair, conspired to commit fraud against your spouse, and most damningly, you brought a dangerous fugitive criminal into your home and into your daughter's life. You are by any definition an unfit parent." Matthew's head snapped up. "No, please. She's my daughter. I love her. Your love did not stop you from trying to terminate her mother's rights based on fabricated evidence." Judge Warren said, her voice like iron. "You do not get to use your child as a shield now. Effective immediately, Elena Petrov is granted sole legal and physical custody of Laura Petrov. Mr. Petrov's visitations will be supervised for 2 hours. Twice a month, at a state-run facility, pending a new psychological evaluation, one that I will order." She lifted her gavel. "This divorce is granted. All motions from the respondent are affirmed. All motions from the petitioner are denied. This case is closed. We are adjourned." The gavel slammed down. It was over. Elena didn't move for a full minute. She just sat listening to the sounds of the courtroom emptying. She heard Richard Sullivan telling Matthew, "We'll appeal," and she heard Matthew's dead, hollow reply. "With what?" Dylan Finch put his hand on her shoulder. "Elena, it's over. You won." Elena turned to him, and the composure she had held for the last hour finally broke. She didn't sob. She just let the tears stream down her face, a silent, steady flow of 6 months of terror, pain, and exhaustion. "You saved my life, Dylan," she whispered. "You saved my daughter's life." "You saved your own," Dylan said, his own eyes wet. "You never gave up. Now let's get you out of here. Someone is waiting for you." He helped her up. Her legs were still shaky, but this time it was from relief. They walked out of the courtroom past the clusters of stunned reporters who were already shouting into their phones about the arrest of the millionaire mistress. They walked past Matthew, who was sitting alone at his table, a multi-billionaire on paper who couldn't afford a cup of coffee. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of the life he had set on fire. Elena looked at him not with hatred or even pity. She just looked. And then she walked on. She didn't feel like a victor. She didn't feel joy. She felt quiet. She felt like a survivor who had just washed up on shore after a shipwreck. Dylan walked her down the long marble hallway and out the massive front doors of the courthouse. The Texas sun was bright, and it made her wince. And then she saw her, Standing at the bottom of the steps next to Dylan's beat-up sedan was her daughter. Dylan must have arranged for the social worker to bring her anticipating a good outcome, though surely not this. Laura, her dark hair in pigtails, saw her. Her face, which had been anxious and small, exploded with light. "Mommy!" She broke free from the social worker and sprinted up the steps. Elena stumbled down to meet her, dropping to her knees on the hard stone. Laura slammed into her chest, her small arms wrapping around Elena's neck so tightly it hurt. "Mommy, mommy, mommy," Laura chanted, burying her face in Elena's hair. Elena hugged her back, her face pressed against her daughter's scalp, inhaling the scent of her, the scent of grape shampoo and childhood. She held her, rocking her, her body shaking. "I've got you," Elena whispered, her voice thick. "I've got you. It's over. We're safe. We're going home." She looked up at Dylan, who was smiling, his face a map of pure exhaustion and pride. She had no money. She had no company. Her name was all over the news, tied to a scandal that would be talked about for years. She was starting from absolute zero. But as she held her daughter in her arms, feeling the frantic, happy beat of Laura's heart against her own, Elena Petrov knew she hadn't lost anything of value. She had fainted. The mistress had smiled. The judge had delivered justice. And Elena had survived. She had her daughter. She had her name. And for the first time in a very long time, she was free. The gavel falls, but the story doesn't end there. Elena and Laura had to rebuild their lives from nothing, armed only with their resilience and the truth. Matthew Petrov faced years of lawsuits, and Serafina Hayes, or Sarah Jenkins, was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for fraud and identity theft. This story is a brutal reminder that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and that arrogance is always a prelude to a fall. It shows that even when you're pushed to the brink, even when you collapse under the weight of injustice, there is always hope. Sometimes the person who seems to have all the power is just the one with the most to lose. If you were gripped by Elena's fight for justice, please hit that like button. What part of the judge's ruling was the most satisfying? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more true-life stories of drama betrayal and ultimate vindication, make sure to share this video and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. The sound of the key in the lock was the only warning. Bruce Whitman didn't expect to be home before sunset, but a wave of instinct had pulled him from the city. He found his pregnant wife, Janice, huddled in the nursery, her body trembling. Fresh, ugly bruises painted the skin along her jaw and wrist. Her tears were silent. But her words, when they came, shattered the immaculate silence of their Greenwich home. "Bruce," she whispered, her voice raw. "Am I ugly? Am I a monkey? Don't I belong here?" The Whitman estate on Round Hill Road wasn't a house. It was a statement. Built of field stone and quiet arrogance, it broadcasted 3 generations of old money dominance to the perfectly manicured Connecticut landscape. Tonight, it felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Bruce let his Italian leather briefcase drop with a muffled thud on the black and white marble foyer. The silence was absolute. No welcome, no faint sound of music, not even the hum of the television. Just the oppressive, heavy quiet that had become the norm. He loosened his Brioni tie, the silk whispering its protest. He was a man who fixed things, broken supply chains, hostile takeovers, fluctuating markets. He was Bruce Whitman, the heir who'd quadrupled the family's shipping fortune. But this silence, this creeping chill in his own home, was a problem he couldn't liquidate. He was home early. The last-minute cancellation of the Singapore call had left an unnerving void in his schedule. He'd felt a sudden, sharp pull homeward, a prickle of unease he hadn't been able to name. Now, standing in the cathedral-like emptiness, he wished he'd stayed in the city. He found a scarf on the chair, one of Janice's. It was a vibrant silk, full of the colour and life he'd fallen in love with, a stark contrast to the muted, ancestral beige of his world. He picked it up. It smelled faintly of her, of lavender and something sweet, but it was twisted, as if she had been wringing it in her hands. He walked past the grand staircase, his shoes clicking on the hardwood, and headed toward the new wing. The nursery. They'd argued about it. He'd wanted a top-tier designer from Manhattan. Janice had wanted to paint it herself. She'd won. Or so he thought. The door was ajar. He saw her, not on the heirloom rocking chair his mother had insisted upon, but on the floor, next to a half-assembled white crib. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around her 7-month belly. Her shoulders were shaking. "Janice?" His voice sounded too loud, an intrusion. She flinched, her head snapping up. The speed with which she tried to wipe her face, to compose her features into a mask of placid calm, was more alarming than the tears themselves. "Bruce, you're home." Her voice was a wisp, and then he saw it. Not just tear tracks, but a faint, purpling shadow blooming from her jawline, disappearing into her dark hair. He moved, crossing the room in 2 strides, crouching in front of her. His mind, trained to see patterns and threats, went blank. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice dropping into the low, cold tone he usually reserved for the boardroom. "Nothing. I slipped." She wouldn't look at him. Her eyes darted to the window, the crib, the floor. "I was carrying a box, and I slipped by the stairs." "Clumsy." She gave a small, brittle laugh that died instantly. He reached out, his fingers gently grazing the bruise. She flinched again, a sharp, involuntary recoil. "Janice, look at me." She did, and his stomach clenched. The woman he'd married, the vibrant artist whose laughter used to echo in these sterile halls, was gone. In her place was this haunted, pale creature, her eyes wide with a fear he didn't recognize. "It was just an accident," she whispered, a new tear rolling down her cheek. "Please don't fuss." "An accident," he repeated, the word tasting like ash. He saw her other hand, the one clutching her belly. Her wrist, where her watch should be, was raw and red. Through the open nursery window, a faint breeze carried the sound of voices from the garden below. Maria, their head housekeeper, and Sophia, one of the newer staff. They were speaking in rapid Spanish, their voices low, convinced they were alone. "Pobretita. She doesn't smile anymore." "Hush, the old one has ears everywhere. She was here again today. I saw. I wish El Señor would see too. He's always working." "What can he do? It's his mother." Bruce went still. His mother. Margaret. The words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at Janice, her desperate, paper-thin lie. "I slipped." He looked at the half-finished crib, the can of pale yellow paint she hadn't touched in weeks. He'd been so busy building an empire, he hadn't noticed the rot setting in at its very foundation. He stood up, the anger coming fast and hot, but it was hollow, undermined by a sudden, sickening wave of guilt. "I'll get you some ice," he said, his voice clipped. He walked out of the room, not looking back, his mind racing. He was Bruce Whitman. He was a fixer, and for the first time in his life, he had no idea where to even begin. In the corner of the hallway, A small black dome blinked its tiny red light. The security camera. He'd had them installed for burglars. It had never occurred to him that the threat might already be inside. The next morning, the pretense of normalcy was grotesque. The kitchen was filled with the thin, pale light of a New England dawn, making the gleaming sub-zero fridge and marble countertops feel less like a home and more like a high-end morgue. The kettle hissed. The toaster clicked. Janice moved like a fragile automaton, one hand splayed protectively across her belly, the other carefully buttering a piece of toast she would not eat. Bruce watched her. He saw the way she flinched when the butter knife grazed the tender skin of her bruised wrist, a tiny, bird-like movement. Barely perceptible. But he saw it. He snapped his laptop shut. The sound was a gunshot in the quiet room. "Did you sleep?" he asked. A nod, too quick. Her eyes were fixed on the granite island. "I'll cancel my meetings. You should rest." "No. Don't." Her head came up, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "You have to go. It's a normal day. Please, Bruce, I'm fine." Her answers were packaged, rehearsed. They felt like lines she'd practiced in front of a mirror, and the realization chilled him. She wasn't just lying about the bruises. She was actively managing him, trying to keep him at arm's length. From the garden, 2 groundskeepers walked past the open window, their voices carrying on the damp air. "She used to love those roses," one said, his voice a low rumble. "Used to be out here painting. Haven't seen her out here in, must be 3 months. Quiet's not always peaceful, man. Quiet's just quiet. He's always working." The housekeeper's words from last night echoed in his head. Bruce rinsed a coffee mug that was already clean, his knuckles white on the porcelain. He had been working. He'd been in Shanghai closing the port deal when Janice had called, crying after her first trimester screening. He'd told her he was busy and to have his assistant schedule a time. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, surfaced. 3 months ago, a gala at the Met. Janice, radiant in a blue dress, had been quiet on the ride home. "Bruce?" she had murmured, her head on his shoulder in the back of the Bentley. "Your mother she's a little intense, isn't she?" He'd been scrolling through market reports on his phone. "That's just Margaret, darling," he'd replied, not looking up. "She's old money. Her bark is worse than her bite. Don't take it personally," she said. She said my dress was vibrantly ethnic. She asked if my family summered, or if we just stayed hot. He had laughed. He'd actually laughed. "She's a dinosaur, Jan. Just smile and nod. She'll come around." But she hadn't come around. And Janice had stopped telling him. She'd stopped laughing. She'd stopped painting. And he, the great fixer, had been so busy conquering the world that he'd let his wife be colonized in her own home. The guilt was suffocating, a heavy, leaden weight in his chest. This wasn't just on his mother. This was on him. "I have calls to take," he said, his voice flat. Janice nodded, her shoulders slumping in relief. The nod felt like a wall. He walked to his study, a room panelled in dark mahogany, a shrine to Whitman men who had come before him. He let the heavy door click shut, the sound sealing him in. He stood facing his desk, hands braced on the cool leather blotter. The security monitor, a matte black square in the corner of his credenza, waited, patient, unblinking. He had installed the system himself, top of the line, encrypted. His mother had called it new money paranoia. He entered the 12-digit code, paused, exhaled, and pressed play. The day before, unfolded in a silent, tiled grid. Foyer, staircase, kitchen, nursery hall. At first, it was nothing but the mundane ballet of a wealthy home. Maria with a laundry basket, a delivery signed at the gate, sunlight crawling across the marble. Bruce scrubbed the timeline forward, the time-lapse shadows of his own home crossing the floor like tides. He felt like a voyeur, a trespasser. 3:12 p.m. The kitchen feed caught movement at the back door. Bruce leaned closer, his heart starting a low, heavy drum against his ribs. His mother, Margaret Whitman, stepped in. She didn't use the front door. She never did. She used the garden entrance, a key she'd had for 30 years. She was immaculate. Pearl earrings, a Chanel boucle jacket in pale blue, her silver hair coiled into a precise, weaponized bun. She didn't look toward the camera. People who believe they own a place forget it can look back. He watched. Janice entered the frame, holding a mug. She looked surprised, and for a split second, terrified. She covered it with a small, strained smile. Bruce eased the timeline forward, second by agonizing second. The first minute was a performance. Cool smiles, words he couldn't hear. Janice offering the mug, Margaret refusing with a small, dismissive wave. The second minute, the chill set in. Margaret's posture changed, her chin angled down in that appraising, disdainful way he knew so well. Janice's shoulders inched up toward her ears. The third minute, the mask slipped. Bruce watched his mother close the space between them. Her finger, adorned with his grandmother's diamond, pointed like a blade. The audio was off. He'd disabled it on the indoor cameras for privacy, a decision he now fiercely regretted. But the shape of her mouth was clear. The venom was visible. "You don't belong here." Janice flinched, her hand pressing against her belly, steadying herself. She didn't answer. She just stood there, absorbing it. And then Margaret's hand darted out. It wasn't a slap. It was a shove, a hard, practiced, two-handed shove against Janice's upper arms. Janice, 7 months pregnant, stumbled back, her body hitting the edge of the marble counter with a force that made Bruce wince. Her face twisted in a mask of shock and pain. She caught herself on the counter's edge, her breath hitching. Bruce's jaw locked so hard his teeth ached. He hit rewind, played it again, slower. His stomach turned. His feet felt nailed to the floor. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't old money intensity. This was assault. He scrubbed forward. Another clip. Margaret, standing in the nursery doorway, arms folded. She was staring at the half-assembled crib as if it had personally offended her. Janice tried to edge past her. Margaret stepped, blocking the path. The confrontation was quick. Margaret's lips moved. Janice tried to answer, her expression pleading. Bruce zoomed in. Janice was crying now, trying to hide it. Then it came, the slap. It was so fast, so casual, it barely registered. A quick, flat, unceremonious strike across the face. Not a dramatic movie slap. A cold, correcting a dog slap. Janice's head snapped to the side. She steadied herself on the doorframe, one hand flying to her cheek. She blinked, fast, swallowing whatever sound tried to escape. She didn't fight back. She didn't yell. She just took it. Bruce sat back, the leather of his Eames chair groaning under his weight. He stared at the paused frame, his mother's hand in midair, Janice half-braced. A cold, prickling sweat climbed his neck. This was what his wife had been enduring. This was the accident. "I wish he'd notice," Maria had said. He hadn't noticed. He'd been blind, deaf, and stupid. Outside the study, he heard footsteps in the hall. Maria and Sophia. Their voices a ribbon of worry as they passed his door. She's covering her cheek again. I know. The mark is worse today. Maybe today he will see. He muted the monitor, the silence of the room rushing in. He pressed his thumb and forefinger to the bridge of his nose, breathing slow, trying to push down the blind, primal rage that was clawing its way up his throat, yelling, confronting, smashing things. That was what she expected. That was her territory. Margaret Whitman didn't just win arguments, she staged them. If he confronted her with this anger, she would turn the room into a theater. Tears, outrage, denial. She would twist it, make him the villain, make Janice the unstable, lying interloper. He looked at the screen. The pattern was clear. Another visit, another escalation. This wasn't going to stop. It was going to get worse. The rage didn't fade, but it cooled. It settled, hardening into something heavy and precise. He would not let this be rumor or family drama. He would not let this be a he said, she said. He opened the system settings. He found the microphone icon for the kitchen camera. He clicked Enable Audio. The decision was already a structure. He would make space for the truth to reveal itself, without him there to distort the field. He would create a frame no one could wriggle out of. Clean angles, steady light, and this time, sound. He would let his mother build her own gallows. The plan formed not with the adrenaline of a fight, but with the cold patience of a siege. Bruce spent the next hour not in a rage, but in a state of chilling focus. The same focus he used to dismantle a competitor. He was no longer just a husband. He was an architect. First, he scrubbed through the last 3 months of footage. The task was agonizing. He saw the progression, the slow, insidious erosion of his wife. It started with dismissive gestures, Margaret moving a glass Janice had set down, rearranging flowers Janice had arranged, her lips moving in constant, silent correction. Then 2 months ago came the first physical contact. Margaret grabbing Janice's arm in the hallway, pulling her to a stop. Janice yanking free. Bruce's heart hammered. Janice had fought back at first, but the visits became more frequent, the aggression more pronounced. He saw his mother block Janice in the kitchen, saw her throw a magazine Janice was reading into the trash, saw her get in Janice's face, lip curling, finger jabbing. He realized with a dawning horror that his mother's visits coincided perfectly with his travel schedule. She was checking his calendar. She was waiting until he was gone. This was calculated, and Janice, he saw, had learned. She'd learned that fighting back only made it worse. She'd learned to de-escalate, to retreat, to make herself small. She'd built a prison of passivity to protect herself and her child, and he had handed his mother the keys. He looked at the footage from yesterday again. The slap, the shove, it was brutal. He rose from the desk and walked to the credenza. He adjusted a slightly crooked photo. His parents, 20 years ago, at a ribbon cutting for the new hospital wing, bearing their name. Margaret, all polish and philanthropic grace. He caught his own reflection, overlapping hers in the glass. The same jawline, the same eyes. His throat tightened. He set his palm flat against the cool wood, grounding himself. No rushing, no yelling. If he went downstairs now and held Janice, if he told her what he knew, she might be too terrified to go along with a plan. She might beg him to just let it go, to not provoke the matriarch. Or worse, Margaret would see the shift in their dynamic and retreat, disappearing underground, only to resurface later, more poisonous than before. No, he had to end this, not just stop it. End it. He needed a stage, he needed a witness, and he needed irrefutable, undeniable proof. He checked his phone. His mother's weekly supervisory lunch with the estate's head gardener was tomorrow. Wednesday. She was always here on Wednesdays, to make sure the azaleas aren't being butchered. She would be on the property. He went back to his desk. He pulled up the camera feeds. He enabled audio on the kitchen, the foyer, and the nursery hall. He checked the data storage protocols. Everything was backed up to a secure cloud server, time-stamped and encrypted. He pulled up his email. He sent a message to his driver. "Change of plans, Tom. I'll be driving myself to the city tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp." He then sent a message to his executive assistant. "Clear. Clear my schedule for tomorrow. All of it. I'll be unavailable. Family matter." He powered down the monitor. The image shrank to a pinprick of light before going black. The room felt colder. He stood there a moment longer, hands at his sides, knuckles softening. He would create a vacuum, and his mother's malice would rush to fill it. It was a trap, not of spite, but of necessity. For Janice, for their child, for the very air in this house to be safe again. He stepped back into the hallway, his face a calm, composed mask, his voice even. He found Janice in the living room, curled on the sofa, pretending to read a book. "Darling," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm so sorry. I have to go into the city tomorrow. An emergency at the office. I'll have to leave early." He watched her face. He saw the flicker of sheer, animal panic, so fast he would have missed it if he wasn't looking. He saw her fight it down. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "Of course. Work is important. I should be back by dinner." He kissed her forehead. Her skin was cold. "You'll be okay?" She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "We'll be fine." He had to walk away. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Bruce rose before the sun, the lie heavy in his gut. He lay still for a long time, listening to Janice's breathing beside him. It was fragile, shallow, interrupted by soft, whimpering tremors in her sleep. He wanted to shake her awake, to tell her everything, to bundle her and her unborn child into a car and just drive. But he couldn't. The moment he did, the power shifted back to Margaret. His mother thrived on chaos she could control. The only way to beat her was with order she couldn't. By 8 a.m. he was dressed. Suit, tie, the full armor. He kissed Janice's forehead. She was awake, pretending she hadn't been crying. "I'll see you tonight," he said. "Drive safe," she whispered. He left through the front doors with deliberate noise. Staff noted the departure. Maria gave him a look he couldn't quite decipher. Was it pity or contempt? He deserved both. Tires rolled down the long gravel driveway. The estate fell quiet again, but he didn't drive to the city. He didn't even leave the property. He'd parked the Tesla in silent mode in the old carriage house at the far end of the estate, a relic from his grandfather's time. It was dusty and smelled of oil and old leather, and it was the one place he knew his mother would never, ever go. He leaned the driver's seat back. On his lap, his tablet glowed, the live camera feeds lining up in sharp, silent rectangles. Kitchen, foyer, nursery hall. He put in his AirPods. He hit the audio button, and he waited. Time slowed to a crawl. 9 a.m. The gardeners arrived. He heard Maria giving instructions in the kitchen, the sounds of a normal day. 10 a.m. Janice came down. He watched her on the feed, his heart aching. She poured a glass of water. She looked at the phone on the wall. She picked it up, then put it down. She was hugging herself, her hand rubbing her belly. 10:30 a.m. Sophia, the young maid, came in. "Mrs. Whitman, can I get you anything? Some tea?" "No, thank you, Sophia. I'm just fine." Janice's voice was a thin thread. 10:45 a.m. The silver Bentley. It didn't pull up the main drive. It slid, shark-like, up the service road and parked near the garden entrance. Bruce leaned forward, his jaw tight. Margaret stepped out, polished as ever. Today it was a cream-colored pantsuit, pearls at her throat. She didn't ring. She used her key. The sound of the back door opening was loud in his ears. Her heels tapped across the marble. Measured. Rehearsed. "Well," Margaret's voice, clipped and cold, filled his ears. "Still here, are we?" Janice, who had been standing by the counter, froze. Her back was to the camera, but Bruce could see her entire body go rigid. "Margaret, I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly." Margaret walked into the frame, stopping directly in front of Janice. She was inches from her face. I saw Bruce's car leave. Finally, a moment of peace. "Now, tell me, what did you say to him last night?" "What? Nothing. Don't lie to me, girl." Margaret's voice was a low snarl. "You've been moping around for weeks. I saw you crying when he came home. What pathetic little story did you spin?" "I didn't. I told him I slipped." Margaret laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Good. You're learning. Keep your stupid mouth shut, and maybe you'll get to keep the perks. But you and I need to be clear." She stepped closer. Bruce watched, his blood turning to ice. "This is my house," Margaret whispered, the microphone picking up every venomous syllable. "This is my son's house. You are just a temporary, unfortunate biological necessity. A vessel. Nothing more." "Please!" Janice's voice was barely audible. "Please don't!" "You think this baby secures your spot?" Margaret sneered. "You think that thing in your belly makes you a Whitman? My God, you are naive. You are a stain, Janice, a little league artist from a no-name family in Ohio. You think I'm going to let you dilute a bloodline? It's not. It's Bruce's baby." Janice was backing up, her hands held up. "It's your mistake," Margaret hissed. "And I'm here to correct it." And then it happened. It wasn't a shove. Not this time. Margaret grabbed the mug of tea Janice had just poured. With a flick of her wrist, she dashed the hot liquid onto the floor, the porcelain shattering in white shards. "Clean it up," she commanded. Janice flinched, staring at the mess. "Margaret, please!" "On your knees, clean it up, Janice." Tears streaming down her face, slowly, began to lower herself, her hand shaking as she reached for a piece of broken porcelain. That was it. Bruce's hand was on the door of the carriage house. He was ready to move, but he stopped. Janice had stopped too. She was still crouched, but she wasn't picking up the pieces. She was trembling, and then, very slowly, she looked up. "No," she whispered. Margaret's face, perfectly framed by the camera, went from smug contempt to livid disbelief. "What did you say?" I said. "No." Janice used the counter to pull herself back up, her hand on her belly. Her voice was shaking, but it was there. "I won't. I'm not your servant. And this is my home, too." It was the bravest thing Bruce had ever seen. It was also the last match on the gasoline. Margaret's face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. You thing!" she shrieked. "You dare?" Her eyes darted around the kitchen. They landed on the knife block. Bruce's breath caught. "No, no, no!" She moved. She grabbed the largest knife from the block, the chef's knife. She didn't raise it to stab. She held it low, almost casually. But she lifted it. She held it. "I should have done this the day he brought you home," Margaret whispered, her voice lethally calm. "Cut the rot out before it spreads." She took one step toward Janice. That was enough. Bruce was moving before the thought completed. The carriage house door flew open. He was sprinting across the lawn, the damp grass, soaking his suit trousers, his phone already in his hand. He wasn't thinking. He was pure, kinetic instinct. He didn't use the back door. He went straight for the heavy oak front doors, hitting them with his shoulder so hard the wood shuddered in its frame. The sound that ripped from his throat was not a word. It was a roar. "Enough!" He stormed through the foyer and skidded to a halt on the marble floor of the kitchen entryway. The scene froze, a perfect, horrific tableau. Janice, backed against the far wall, her face white with terror, her hands locked over her belly. Margaret, center stage, her arm still half raised, the gleaming chef's knife in her hand. Her head was turned, her eyes wide, not with shame or guilt, but with the sheer, animal shock of being caught. Bruce advanced, one slow step at a time. His voice, when it came, was no longer a roar. It was a low, steady cut that was more terrifying than any shout. "Put the knife down! Bruce!" Margaret's face instantly rearranged itself. The mask of the victim snapped into place. "Oh, thank God you're here! This creature, she attacked me. She threw the tea. She's hysterical." It was a masterful performance. Tears welled in her eyes. Her hand, the one not holding the knife, trembled. Bruce didn't even look at Janice. He kept his eyes locked on his mother. I said, "Put it down." "Darling, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He pointed up, toward the corner of the ceiling. "I understand that the 4K camera above your left shoulder has been recording, with audio, since the moment you walked in." He watched the blood drain from his mother's face. He watched her eyes dart up to the small black dome and the tiny blinking red light she had never noticed. The knife clattered to the counter, ringing sharp against the marble before rolling to a stop. Her mask didn't just crack, it vaporized. The rage returned, hotter this time, fueled by humiliation. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice a low vibration. "Spying? In your father's house?" It became necessary. He was at Janice's side now, pulling her away from the wall, tucking her behind him. Janice grabbed the back of his suit jacket, her fingers digging into the fabric like claws. He could feel her trembling. "You'll believe her over me?" Margaret spat. "Your own mother? Blood?" "I don't need to believe anyone, Mother," Bruce said, his voice dead. "I have the footage. Every shove, every slap, every word." He pulled his phone from his pocket. Every threat. He held it up. On the screen, the live feed was still playing, a few seconds delayed. He hit rewind, and the sound of Margaret's own voice filled the kitchen. "You are a stain, Janice. A temporary, unfortunate, biological necessity." Margaret stared at the phone, her mouth opening and closing. No sound came out. And then, distant but growing closer, came the sound. The clean, unmistakable wail of sirens, cutting through the manicured piece of Round Hill Road. Margaret's head snapped toward the window. What have you done?" "I called 911, Bruce said, his thumb hovering over the send button on an email already addressed to his lawyer, the video file attached. "The moment you picked up the knife, I told them there was a woman in my home, armed and threatening my pregnant wife. You wouldn't." The panic was real now, her eyes wild. "The press! The family name! Bruce, this will destroy us." "You're wrong," Bruce said, stepping fully in front of Janice, shielding her. "It will destroy you. The family name is the last thing you should be worried about." The sirens were loud now, pulling into the driveway. Blue and red lights began to paint the pristine, white walls of the kitchen. "You can't do this to me," Margaret whispered, collapsing against the counter, the perfect victim once more. "I'm your mother." Bruce looked at the woman who had raised him, the woman he had feared and revered, and felt nothing. Just a cold, empty void. "No," he said, as the heavy knock of a police officer echoed through the foyer. "You're not." Two officers stepped into the foyer. They were not the local community police Margaret knew by name and charmed at charity balls. This was the Greenwich PD, alert and all business, responding to a high-priority domestic assault-in-progress call. "Sir, we got a call about a woman with a knife?" The lead officer, a man named Chen, said, his hand resting on his sidearm. "In here, officer." Bruce's voice was steady. He didn't move from his position in front of Janice. The officers entered the kitchen. They took in the scene in a single, practiced sweep. The shattered porcelain on the floor, the chef's knife on the counter, the pale, trembling, pregnant woman hiding behind the man in the suit, and the older woman, now weeping softly against the counter. "Ma'am, are you all right?" the second officer, a woman named Riley, asked, her voice directed at Janice. Janice just nodded, her face buried in Bruce's back. "My mother, Margaret Whitman," Bruce said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She assaulted my wife." "Now just a minute," Margaret shot up, the tears gone, replaced by pure indignation. "This is a misunderstanding. I am Margaret Whitman. This is my son. This is my home." "Officer Chen," Bruce interrupted, holding out his tablet. "This will explain everything. This is a recording from the last 15 minutes. He pressed play. The kitchen went silent, save for the sound of Margaret's own voice, captured in high-definition audio, echoing through the room. "You are a stain. On your knees. Clean. It. Up. I should have done this. Cut the rot out." Bruce watched the officers' faces. Their professional calm hardened. They didn't look at Margaret. They just watched the screen. When the clip reached the point where Margaret picked up the knife, Officer Chen nodded to his partner. "That's enough, sir," he said. He turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Whitman, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." "What?" Margaret shrieked. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am?" "Yes, ma'am," Officer Riley said, her voice flat as she produced a pair of handcuffs. "You're a woman who just threatened another person with a deadly weapon. We call that assault with a deadly weapon and terroristic threats." The sound of the metal handcuffs snapping shut seemed to suck all the air from the room. It was a sharp, definitive click-click. Margaret's composure completely fractured. This was real. This was not a social slight. This was a booking. Bruce, stop this! Tell them! This is a family matter!" she screamed, her voice cracking. Bruce finally turned to look at her, at the woman in the cream-colored Chanel suit, her hands cuffed behind her back, her face a mask of rage and fear. He knelt in front of Janice, who was now sitting on the floor, her back against the cabinet. He took her face in his hands. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his eyes searching hers. "The baby?" "We're okay," she whispered back, her hands coming up to cover his. You came home." "I'm sorry," he whispered, his own voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Jan. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I didn't listen." Behind them, the officers were reading Margaret her rights. "You have the right to remain silent." "You bastard!" Margaret screamed at Bruce. "You've destroyed this family. You'll never be forgiven for this. You've ruined everything." Bruce didn't look up. He just pressed his forehead to Janice's, shielding her from the sound, anchoring her. As Officer Chen and Officer Riley escorted Margaret Whitman, in handcuffs, out the front door, the neighbors were already gathering. The whispers curled like smoke from behind pristine hedges. The silver Bentley sat, abandoned, by the service entrance. A new era for the Whitman family had just begun. The house was quiet again. But this was a new silence. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of secrets. It was the light, clean silence of a space that had been scrubbed raw. The police had left. A cleaning crew, one Bruce had called from a service in Stamford, not their regular staff, had quietly and efficiently removed the broken porcelain, scrubbed the tea stain from the grout, and polished the knife marks from the counter. Maria and Sophia had been given the rest of the week off, with pay. Now it was just Bruce and Janice. They sat in the sunroom, the light fading, turning the sky a bruised purple. Janice was wrapped in a cashmere throw, sipping a chamomile tea Bruce had made. He hadn't left her side. For a long time, neither spoke. Bruce just watched her, memorizing the lines of her face as if seeing her for the first time. He'd spent their entire marriage looking at her. He was only just learning to see her. Finally she turned to him, her eyes clear. She said, She said she would ruin me, Janice whispered, her hand on her belly. She said you would believe her. That blood always wins. She was wrong, Bruce said, his voice rough. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Blood doesn't win. Decency wins. Love wins. Jan, I'm so ashamed. This isn't your fault, Bruce. Isn't it? He looked away, out at the darkening lawn. I'm a fixer. I solve problems. But I ignored the one that mattered. I let you be brave all by yourself. I let her do this. My neglect was her weapon. No. Janice's voice was surprisingly strong. She squeezed his hand. Your presence is my shield. You were busy, yes. You were blind. But you weren't cruel. She is. The call came, as he knew it would, around 7 p.m. His father, Arthur Whitman, from his study in Palm Beach. Bruce saw the name, let it ring twice, and then answered, putting it on speaker. What in God's name is going on, Bruce? Arthur's voice was a formidable boom, even over the phone. Your mother is in a holding cell. The Journal is already calling me. What is this? Hello, Father. Bruce's voice was calm. Mother was arrested today. I know that. Unarrest her. Call the commissioner. Call the governor. Fix it. She was arrested, Bruce continued, as if his father hadn't spoken, for assaulting my wife, for threatening her and our unborn child with a knife. And I have it all on video. There was a long, stunned silence on the line. The bluster was gone. A knife? Arthur stammered. Yes. And the months of abuse leading up to it. I've sent the file to my lawyer and to yours. You can fix it all you want, Father. But she will never be allowed near my wife or my child again. If I see her within 500 feet of this house, I will release the footage to every news outlet in the country. Are we clear? Another silence. Deeper. Bruce could picture his father, swirling the brandy in his snifter, recalculating. She's always been high-strung, your mother, Arthur finally said, his voice quiet. She's a violent criminal, Bruce corrected, and I'm done enabling her. So are you. He didn't wait for a reply. He ended the call. He looked at Janice. A small smile was playing on her lips. It was the first real smile he'd seen in months. That, she said, was impressive. I'm just getting started, he said, pulling her closer. This is our house now, Jan. Really. We're going to paint the nursery, whatever color you want. Yellow, she whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. I've always wanted yellow. 3 months later, the headlines had faded. Margaret Whitman had been released on bail, her high-priced legal team spinning a narrative of a nervous breakdown and family stress. But the damage was done. The video, though not public, had been seen by the judge. A restraining order was in place, ironclad and permanent. The Queen of Greenwich had lost her throne. She was in a wellness retreat in Switzerland, a gilded cage of her family's own making. The Whitman estate on Round Hill Road felt different. Lighter, Bruce stood in the doorway of the nursery. It was yellow, a bright, unapologetic, sun-drenched yellow. The half-assembled crib was gone, replaced by a beautiful, hand-carved bassinet. Janice was sitting in the rocking chair, not the heirloom, but a new one, comfortable and modern, humming softly. In her arms, wrapped in a simple white blanket, was Lily. Born 2 days ago, healthy and loud and perfect. Bruce walked in, his stockinged feet silent on the new plush rug. He hadn't worn shoes in the house in months. He sat on the floor, leaning his back against the wall, just watching his family. His company was fine. The markets had risen and fallen. He'd delegated. He'd taken his first real leave in 15 years. He'd learned that the Empire didn't crumble if he wasn't there for every single battle, but his family nearly had. "She's smiling," Janice whispered, looking down at the sleeping baby. "She's got her mother's smile," Bruce replied, his voice thick. He thought about the word legacy. For his entire life, it had meant buildings with his name on them, stock portfolios, bloodlines. It had been a weight, a burden, a crown. He looked at his mother, a woman so obsessed with the purity of her legacy that she'd been willing to destroy a life to protect it. Now he saw legacy differently. It wasn't in the marble foyer downstairs or the name on the hospital wing. It was right here, in this yellow room. It was the curve of his wife's smile, now easy and real. It was the warmth of his daughter in her arms. It was the peace that came not from power, but from protection. Wealth wasn't numbers on a screen. It was this quiet, unbroken, hard-won moment. Janice looked up, her eyes meeting his. She didn't have to say anything. He saw it all there, the forgiveness, the shared strength, the promise of a new beginning. For Bruce Whitman, the greatest battle of his life hadn't been fought in a boardroom. It had been fought in his own home. And for the first time, against his own blood, he had truly, finally won. That's the powerful reminder this story leaves us with. Sometimes the greatest threat isn't from the outside world, but from the very people who share our name. The bravest thing we can do is stand against a toxic legacy to protect the family we choose. Bruce's choice to stand by love over blood, and Janice's resilience in the face of terror, is a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about what you inherit, but what you have the courage to build. If you were moved by their journey to find justice and peace, please hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and redemption. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.